Here. All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome on our last session for 2020. It is a Saturday morning. We are back on our usual routine of this group, but instead of meeting at the marché, we are meeting online. And we are continuing our series of friends around the world. We have had many friends around the world right now and until now. And today we have Yves Hanoulle, all the way from Belgium, with good chocolate, good beer, and good fries that make me hungry so early in the morning thinking about it. But Eve, I know Eve from community. So Eve owns the calendar of all the agile events, and sometimes I have messed up the calendar, and I've added events, and then I've added my personal events, and I've created some trouble. But he has been always patient. He has been always helpful, and he does a lot about the community. And he has created also a couple of books that I am very happy. I wrote a little bit on one of them, and so Eve brings that community perspective. That's what I love about Eve. So um, with our community here growing and getting more mature and having much more interesting conversations on every meetup, on every time we get together, I thought Eve can bring a little bit of that secret juice to get our community even stronger, and even from this perspective of the product owner as a service. So I'm going to stop here. I'm Ardita, by the way. I always forget to say my name. I'm Ardita Karai, and I'm going to leave you with Eve. Eve, welcome.
Thank you, Ardita. What an introduction. Indeed, I'm trying to do a lot of community stuff. In that sense, I don't really consider myself the owner of the Agile calendar, but it's more that I started it, and now there's like 200 people like yourself who are updating it and adding events. And indeed, I sometimes see personal appointments like dentists there. That's always very nice to see some of these. I usually just reply and ask, okay, is this an agile event? Can I join as well? But yeah, so far I haven't had anything very personal like people cheating on wives or other things. So it's been like normal events kind of thing. But sometimes it's interesting to see what's popping up. Um, but I blame mostly Apple devices because
Yes.
Agile Calendar starts with an A, and if you do an update of your iPhone, by definition, the first calendar is again the default calendar. So
Yes.
I blame much people. Yeah.
That's exactly it.
But yeah, I like to do a lot of these community things. Don't like to talk too much about myself, but just a little bit. This is, in that sense, a special, unique presentation in the sense that I prefer to do most of my presentations with a pair. I actually started doing workshops with my father back in 2004, something like that. I did a workshop that even brought me to Toronto, doing it and multiple things, but my father didn't want to go on a plane with me, so that's why you see on the slides, I think you can see the slides, right? You can see it in the corner, my partner there when she joined me. I think that's a picture from Toronto when we did a workshop at Agile, the large Agile conference when it was in Toronto, I think 2007, something like that, where there was a special track also for the French track, so that's where we did that. But also after that experience, I like to do also a lot of presentations together with my children. You see the three of them that I've been doing workshops with them or presentations, and sometimes even just doing a little bit different things. With Joppa the first, I even created an Android game because he was wanted to learn something about programming. So that's what we did with Bent. The middle we did. I even did a DJ set in a local club where I used to work. And with Geike, after a presentation, actually, also I translated her Dutch book into English. So it's like I like to do things together. But normally when I go to conferences, yeah, I'm kind of fed up with the lack of diversity, with not enough women. But as a man, it's kind of hard to do something about it if I want to speak myself. So that's why I usually ask the organizations to bring a local, to connect me with a local woman who is interested and who knows about the topic, and then we typically co-create something, and I learn usually a lot more than I bring in. So that's always very nice. But today, this is more about the workshop I created, PO as a service. And as a start, I wanted to take you also, because I thought, and I checked with Ardita, she also thought it was interesting to check, to bring you how I came to that thing, because that's maybe not even more interesting than the workshop itself. So let me go you is this, and this is the idea is also to create a little bit an interaction. So if you look at this picture and you see the board, and if all these posters are work that the product owner wants to do, could that be a PO that you know? And so the goal is to just answer. If you in Zoom, you can actually have a comment. So if it's a PO that you know, you can actually put a thumb up. That's the kind of PO that you know. Some of these, if you think no, it's not the kind of thing, then it's the negative, the tears. It's really like I don't know any PO like that. So just to explain it a little bit, how these different things, so that gives us an idea on how that could work out for some of these POs. So most of the POs I know, again, not all of them, but most of them, they kind of have too much things on their mind. So, and so if I work at a large company and if I want to help out, and let's say there's like 10, 20 teams I want to help out, and we organize a training, an internal training, sometimes even mandatory trainings, how do they show up at the training? Again, the same thing, thumbs up if they would show up at the training, or the tears if they wouldn't show up because they don't have time for that. Just so I see so far, still a little more that don't show up. Maybe it's even. What I've noticed is that it's very hard to get them show up, because of they don't always have time. So okay, maybe there's an extra thing there. Um, what would make them come? So let's think, if you can go into the chat, so if you can type out in the chat what you think could happen if they would show up. So type some of these things, what you think might make them come up at trainings or at other things. For what would they be interested in showing up? Just give a little bit time for people to type something. How to get the team to do more what I want. That's an interesting one. They're forced by the man. Well, they don't want it to come if they are forced, but yeah, they might show up. That's true. But there's a few of these things. Okay, so yeah, sprint planning. But then I was talking about what if we can do some training. So we want them to teach something. Yeah. So the actual work, but there might be. So brown bags, would they show up at brown bags? What if you can vote also at the same thing. You vote for the thumbs up if you think they would show up at brown bags, or the teary eyes if you think they won't show up. What I've noticed is that in many cases, there's two kind of POs that either they have too much work on their hand, and they even work during lunchtime, and they don't even have time to come up to a brown bag, because a brown bag is typical at lunch. There's also the other kind of POs. For them, their lunchtime is sacred, so they don't want to do anything of work, and that's the only relaxed time they have, like half an hour to an hour, and they don't want to show up at lunchtime. Of course, they won't show up at the brown bag either, because they don't want to set a new thing, and they don't want to do so. That's not helping me either. Play agile games. Would they show up if you play agile games? If you want to teach them using a game, would they show up? Again, if you can vote. I see some people already shaking their heads. No, they're not going to show up. What could be a reason to not show up? If you could type that in the chat, if there's a few things why you think they would never show up. Okay, I see some people also saying, okay, for training they might show up. It really depends, of course. There are indeed some of them, and like Danny said, no time for games. What I've also noticed that a lot of POs, especially in the larger companies, are like, no, no, we're serious people. We're not going to play games. I'm serious. I'm talking business. So games, don't even think that as much as we like them as agile coaches, they won't show up.
Yeah,
Invite famous IT people. How would that work? If you invite some famous people, would they show up then?
if they know them. Let's
If
let's
they
let's
know
talk
them.
about this because I think we're just all typing. Maybe we talk.
Yeah, that's the point I want to ask. Who first? Let's start about this. If we know them, who knows who are the people who are here on this slide?
That's Jeff Patton, right?
Jeff Patton is one of them. Who's the other?
I can't
There's
see
three people
them.
that you might know, but indeed it might be hard to see. Who knows some of the others? They may be lesser known in the agile community, but still.
Is that Joseph? No,
No,
I don't
it's
think
not
I.
Joseph. Anyone else has an ID? So the person talking to Jeff is Alan Cooper. Who knows who Alan
Oh,
Cooper
okay.
is?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Anyone who's
I even see Dal Emery there over on the left-hand side.
exactly? Yes, indeed. Dale is there as well. So that's the three people who are there. Um, Dale I've met at, I think in 2003 when yeah, I don't know, when he was talking about resistance as a resource, which is something that actually made me pick up this picture, because Dale is good at, okay, seeing why don't people don't want to do it, and what can I learn from that. So okay, would they show up for famous people? I think what Ardita said is that if they know them, they might show up. Yeah. Um, but then again, and it comes back to some of the chat that was said before. If they think they can learn from it, if they're either famous or something like that. Something that I've seen also in other companies, and I think this one also happened. In the company where I worked with Jeroen, is that if we invite people from famous companies, they might not know the name, but they might know the name from the company.
Mm, yeah.
So what company is this? Do you know what the picture is from?
Google? I don't know.
Not Google.
I'll guess
Spotify?
it's Spotify.
Indeed, it's Spotify.
Okay.
So we had at one company we had someone coming from Spotify over that explained a little bit, but this was more about the process on how they did it to do scaling. The room was packed, but maybe Jeroen remembers, but I don't think we had many product owners. I think it was more coaches and scrum masters in the room. So even if they did talk about some of that person did talk about some of the story writing and some of that things. So okay, might not be the perfect person and the perfect talk for inviting them, but still it was hard.
Mm-hmm.
So that and again, I'm not, I don't want to say that they will never show up and none of them show up, but it's usually a lot harder for them to get them into this kind of non-mandatory training, so the extra thing. So but then I thought, okay, this is actually a wrong way of thinking. So what's wrong with the way of thinking that I've been saying right now and until so far, what I've been doing in this? What, you can blurt this out now and you don't need to type. What is anything that you think is might be wrong with the way I've been proposing things and things like that?
You're not asking them what they want.
Yeah, exactly. It's basically preaching for the choir, and I'm talking about the agile coaches and the scrum masters, but it's not about what do they want. Yeah. So we really have to think through their glasses and look through their glasses and think like, okay, what is their biggest problem? What's the problem that they have? Now, what's the biggest problem that the product owner has, or that a lot of product owners have?
Well, depends, right?
Yeah, there's of course multiple things, but what I've seen in yeah, again, it is there is, it's kind of yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
making
Generalizing.
exactly. So I'm using
Yeah.
just a few of these things, but that's what saw in a lot of
Yeah.
from.
So something I've
Um,
seen in the past that is a big problem for product owners is they have too many internal stakeholders that have differing demands almost to a point where it becomes difficult for the product owner to deliver value for the customers because they're always satisfying some internal stakeholder of some sort. But
yeah, and a side effect. What's a side effect of that? Because they have too many stakeholders.
mhm,
Pressure.
mhm.
Pressure and because what we see is that well they basically they don't have enough time to talk to everyone and to make sure and so I talked to a few of these and I thought okay but what's really your time problem and it's really time to do what brings the value if you compare if you look at your time what's the value that you want to do and what a lot of them really want to do if I want to look at that I really have to go back and start at the end where do they want to end up with and I think this is a little bit what said before as that if they have too many internal stakeholders that's really what they would like to have is a prioritized backlog with great stories yeah they finished the stories are good but they have a prioritized backlog by the
Hmm.
way I took this picture it's not one from a team that I have but I got it sent to a friend if you ever think oh backlog the scrum boards or the kanban boards that you have they should be boring this is an actually board that was used by a team so they look much nicer they're actually working on software um, that has something to do with boats so that is actually in the team but
Hmm.
you can see to the left you can see that there is a limited place in the harbor for new stories to work on you can see that there is actually a limited work. The black square there in the middle is how you get to release things. So it's limited on the number of things you can work on at the same time. And then there is some space when you get into the ocean, and it's also limited just to things that we released this sprint or that they released. And you can see there's a lot of small boats there. These are smaller stories. There is a few speed boats that they need to go through fast and there is actually a very large boat there that's too big to start even working on so they need to decompose it and have smaller stories so it has a lot of metaphors in there and that's what I like it
I
I
have
personally
never I have never seen a board so fun.
yeah that's
Yeah, me
why I like to
neither.
use it
It's really nice.
unfortunately, I don't remember anymore who sent the picture to me, so I can't tell that person. But it's a board I've been and a picture I've been using for more than 5 years to show
Hmm.
people that there is actually this is much more fun. I've also been sent pictures with spiral boards that you want to end up in the middle, and then that story is thrown away. Multiple different things, so you can actually work in different sites and if teams can create their own board that it had and preferable if it has something to do with the work that you're doing it's actually a very fun way to work
Hmm. Eve, do you want me to read the comments about what people thought about what's
ah
the biggest problem
yeah
with product owner? I have
yeah
some comments
sorry yeah
there.
indeed that's good to go back to that indeed
There's Fernando says is the mandatory part that is a problem.
mm-hmm,
Delivering what they want and needs. Don't understand the role of a product owner.
mm-hmm.
Imbalance between demand and capacity. And the biggest problem is getting the client's vision accurately and delivering it. So those were
Yeah,
some
so
ideas.
and the thing is the fun part or the fun or the negative part about not knowing the role, you need to have training, but if you don't know to handle your time and you don't know the role, and they might even be scared to tell it to their co-product owners that they really don't understand the role. So
Hmm.
there's even a lot behind that as well. Um, but that's what I found out is that if I can if we can work on this thing if we can help them to get to a prioritized backlog for great stories. And so basically what I did, and let me click on it. What I did was I wanted to design a workshop around improving stories. So the thing to do is that instead of just doing training. No, no, let's bring each, and I'll explain a little more in detail, but let's work on actual stories. So I'll teach them by improving their own stories. So that, and actually they teach each other and they help each other. So that's much more interesting. The photo here is not from a workshop like that, but it's one of the ones that inspired me, because that's actually work that I've done at a company. That this is just I think an impact mapping that we did. But where I noticed that it was much easier to do these kind of impact mapping workshops to actually get things done, than to teach about impact mapping, for example. Because when you're doing actually work, that's what a lot. And so I thought, okay, how can I create, design a workshop, or better, a series of workshops around that? And so that's what I then called PO as a service. And for that, I want to look a little bit at, so what are the things how to do. The first thing that was really important is that workshop, it's a mini workshop, it's 1 hour maximum. Again, we know they don't have enough time, so let's do something, but for 1 hour, maximum 1 hour. So that's a maximum that they have there. Every product owner brings one story, at least one story, but one story that they want to work on. Um, Sometimes in the beginning it's a little bit, yeah, they want to bring out their best story, but then of course if other people want to improve that, they might not feel good if they said that's the best one. So that sometimes is a little bit harder. So I make sure from the beginning, I say, no, you just bring in any user story you want to work on, and have people work on things like that. So that's something that we do there, and I'll explain in a minute. And then yeah, and then one technique, and that's really important. So in 1 hour you can't of course explain everything. I don't do much theory, but I just pick out one technique that we'll use to improve the user stories that everybody has with them. And then the next time we do a workshop with the people who are there, we use another technique, and that way you can do. And typically sometimes in between, people ask, oh, that one technique, that they all have their own preference of a technique, could you do it again with me and help me out? um, who knows, that also might be an interesting one to talk about, this map here. Who knows where this is coming from? Have you seen this before?
Agile Alliance.
Yes, indeed. It's from the Agile Alliance. It's on their website. I think I forgot the name. It's a French guy that created that for the Agile Alliance. It's also interesting. It's not the techniques that we're using here, or most of them not. But I just looked for one picture about techniques. So that's one that I actually like to do. But one technique. And then the probably the most important part is I want people to work in pairs, or so in duos or in trios. So they come together and they actually in a pair they work together. And what I've noticed is that because people POs a lot of time in the companies, they sometimes are even competitors, because they have to work on a story. They might need to have help from another team, but then that other team might not do their work. So they sometimes feel like competitors, and they don't always look for help and asking questions to each other. And by having a workshop where they regularly have to work with 2 or 3 people, they actually work together, which is not in every company, but in some companies I've noticed that sometimes also is a problem. So that's a little bit how we do the 1 hour, without going completely into detail on some of these things. So let me just give an idea before I go to the questions. Let me give so some of the techniques that I'm using. I'll explain one later in detail, just to show how a real hour works. But so I'm using one of the first ones that I typically start with is slicing product dimension. This is the technique that I've learned from Ellen Gottesdiener. The link to her book. So the links from all these techniques are at the end of the slide, so I can share the links there later as well. Dimensional planning, that's invented by a Belgian guy who looked at the way it's more at a more global level, but that helps a lot of people also. There is a link to a video where I explained this with my daughter Geke when we were in India. So that's explained as well. Acceptance criteria. I assume most of you know what acceptance criteria are. So looking at stories and just inventing extra acceptance criteria for someone else's user story might be really fun. Invest, I think that's a technique also known since also 2003 or something, I think, invented by Bill Wake. Two friends of mine, Patrick Dubois and Jeff Combs, gave a session. It had nothing to do with a product owner, but they gave a session a long time ago where they asked us basically to make things worse. So it was invent some kind of retrospective, and the only thing we were allowed to is, instead of in a real retrospective, how can we improve things, we were only allowed to make things worse. And it turned out to be a very fun way, because, and I've used it a lot with teams that are stuck. If they think we cannot change anything, we have totally no impact, and then I turn it around. Okay, how can we make things worse? And all of a sudden they have tons of ideas on how to make things worse. And they
I
don't
can,
understand.
yeah, I can testify. This always becomes a fun exercise. I have tried with some teams. They feel stuck, but when you reverse it, it becomes like, oh, so much fun and so many ideas.
Yeah, and the thing is, most of the time they can just turn their ideas around, and that's a way how to improve things. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, how can we better communicate? Well, we stop communicating. Okay, that's maybe we have to talk more or whatever. It's they usually, this is a very fun way to do that. This is why I typically try to put it somewhere in the middle where they don't know. Um, Impact mapping from Goiko. The exercise I do is a little bit is not so much with user stories, but typically at a more broader level. Um, User story mapping is an exercise that I've learned that is in the training from Jeff Patton itself, about the morning rituals. That's a very fun one. So they don't need to use their own user stories for that. Swashbooking has some completely also nothing to do with user stories, but this is a fun one to do at the end of the year. It's invented by James Bach and his brother. They have a fun video about that. But I learned it from Jürgen Hoffmann at Agile Camp Germany somewhere, where in 1 hour we read like 10 books with 10 people or something like that. And so you basically bring a lot of books together, and then people get a very limited amount of time, depending on how much time, how many people we have. They get like 10 minutes to read through a book in whatever way they want. So some people read just the content pages, some read the indexes, some people read the first parts of the chapters, and everybody does their own way. And there's like 2-3 people who read the same book in just 10 minutes, and then they come together and they share what they've learned about the book. And in 1 hour, you know about 10 books, what is the book about, and if you feel that this is a book that's interesting for you. So usually people come back out of that exercise if they like reading books, like, oh, this is probably the book I want to read next. So that's a very fun way to very quickly have an idea about a book. You haven't read it, but at least you have an idea about multiple books. Another exercise about personas, and I've actually done a few more, but I didn't always write them down, so I don't know all of them. I need to look them back up. But there's a lot of techniques. So if you would do something similar, you're already at 6-7 at 7 weeks, or depending if you do it every week or every 2-3 weeks, you're gone for a few times.
Jeroen, Jeroen also suggested Triz from the Liberating Structures.
Yeah, so there's
when you were talking about making things worse, I just thought about Triz, which is the first step in Triz is how could we have made the thing we've been doing worse, and then you do some 2 next steps. Fun exercise.
Yeah, so but the goal indeed is to just, for me, this list could go on, and that's one of the things that I hope that well, I find more people who want to experiment with this kind of format and then say, okay, could be other things. But this was much more, well, there's a lot of blah blah and theory there. I want to go into detail for just one of these to say, okay, how did I do it? So I picked the slicing part. Not sure who is familiar with the 7 product dimensions. It's a few people that I see. not well, maybe I explain a little bit. So there's different ways on how you can look at the product, and if you want to slice it, if things are too big, you can just look at, okay, imagine I make an accountancy system. I use my accountancy system totally different than my accountant, and even different than the people who just put in the invoices, for example. So if you want to make a user story smaller, we could make it different depending on the user that wants to interact with it. So that's one way to slice the stories. Um, and that's about the maximum that I explain. I just explained for all of these a little bit how that works. So the interfaces, there's technical interfaces, there's visual interfaces, so we could split it from multiple interfaces and have that there. Actions, like I said, I do a different action than my accountant. So I could just say, okay, even if I would put in an invoice and my accountant put in an invoice, but my accountant will also want to verify invoices. So that's a different action. So we could split that part of the larger project if that was the thing there. Data, there is multiple things that we can do with data. Controls, that's very hard in larger companies or banks or insurance companies, but typically if you want to create an MVP, in the very first version, maybe you don't want to make the difference because my accountant can, let's say, he can edit invoices, and there is restrictions that don't allow me as a normal user to edit to edit invoices. But in the very first version, we could not implement that control because we could just say this is just for accountants, and we just use the number of select people to get feedback. So we don't implement that. So again, the store becomes smaller. Environments, we only support Chrome or we only support an Apple device, things like that. Quality attributes is also a very interesting thing. Of course, I want it to be fast. Of course, I want it to be able to have 10,000 users at the same time. But when we start with our MVP, we all would like to have 1 million users at the same time, but it's probably not going to happen. That's, for me, one of the things that Twitter did a lot in the beginning. They released it, and the first 2 years or 3 years, I don't know how long, they actually grew so fast that they didn't have time to add new features because they only had to support the current ones and make sure that it was possible for, I don't know, the double number of users by the next week or the next month or something like that. So they focused on slicing it to always to, okay, better quality attributes. So that's about the maximum information I give about the slicing dimensions. And then what I ask people to do is, okay, we go in a breakout room, you have your story, you select a partner, and this is what I'm explaining now is typically in a room setting. I'll talk a little bit about the remote part afterwards, but you look for a partner, and in max 5 minutes, you try to find a partner, you both represent your user story, and you select one of them. And typically, not everybody brought their own user story, or some feel not comfortable enough about using this way, or think it's already perfect, whatever. And that's what you do. Then you pass it on to the next pair that's sitting next to you in the room, and then you get the new user story, and you discuss and you look at what dimension would I use to slice this story. The story I just said, it's too big. We think it's too big, so let's slice it a little bit. You put a yellow post-it on it with that dimension, and to help them even more, you put a few examples of dimensions. I just talked about accountancy system, so user, and I could put two or three users in it. It's not much time, 5 minutes. Again, you pass it on. So the goal is not to create better, perfect user stories. The goal is to also to teach them that in a very short time they can actually update and learn something. Because by passing it on to multiple groups, at the end of 5, 6, depending on how many people we are in the room, they actually have a lot of feedback. It comes back to them, and then they get, and depending on how many groups we have and how big we are, then they have about between 5 and 10 minutes to look at that feedback, and to they've now seen also multiple stories from other people. They looked at dimensions, so typically they have also an idea about their own user story, how to slice it, and so they can add one more. I typically ask them to put a green sticky on it, because then they remember, this is mine. This is probably the first day they want to implement. Um, and that's about it. And then we do a debrief. That's very limited, very time boxed. I'm using, and Jeroen probably knows, I'm using a lot of these hourglasses to just to keep the time box to very strict, because one of the other things with product owners, if they have limited time, for them it's like, whoa, but we need 2 hours, 3 hours to work on user stories, and it should be perfect, depending on where they're coming from. But typically in large organizations, I see a lot of product owners like that. And in here, what they've learned is that in 5 minutes, they can actually have a lot of feedback. And within an hour, they get a lot more feedback. So that is one of these things. And that is, yeah, very briefly, in like I said, in the room. Going remote is a lot more different, a lot harder. What I've seen is that if I've done already, so this year was a perfect year for that. I've done workshops like that with product owners in the room, and then we went remotely, and that basically worked really well, because had already done it. They understood how the workshop works, and they figured out the breakout rooms themselves. They connected alone. And then I worked in another company where I hadn't done any of these workshops, and we started remote, and that's a hassle. Partially because we don't have all the, so we don't. It's a large organization that has very limited tool access, so we can't use Zoom, we can't use Teams yet. That will be only for next year. So we only have Skype, and they have to figure out their breakout rooms and everything themselves.
So Eve, have you found that working remote tools are very important?
Yes. Well, actually, for me, I always think that the agile community is very dual on tools. We say it's people and interactions over processes and tools, and at the same time, the community. There's no community that's invented so many tools as the agile community. So but I think what it meant, or what it means. Now let's talk for myself. What I mean with tools is that, yes, I think tools are important, but when a tool doesn't work, I'll invent my own tool, or I use another tool. I'm not stuck to the tool. That's what means people and interaction over processes and tools, is that if a tool doesn't work, I pick another tool that actually makes me do better interaction.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and what I've seen is that, the first time that I used worked remotely in agile environment was in 2004, 2005. That was the beginning of Skype. And actually, for me at that time, it felt like, whoa, this could actually work. Because at that time, not many people were using Skype, and there was no limit on the number of people you could connect with. So that worked rather well. Um, but we didn't have any tools like that before. What we don't notice is that, like I said, it was the beginning of Skype. So one day, Skype was out for 2 days, and we realized that we had no other way to reach the people in Yekaterinburg that we used to work with. So we had a fax number, but we weren't even sure about that. So then we tried to contact them over fax and over email and whatever, but it was very hard because we
Pigeons.
were so,
You could
yeah.
send pigeons.
That we didn't think about that, but you have to train the pigeons to get there, right? So I'm not sure how that would. Um, but these days, yeah, what I've learned from that is that you need backup. You need backup tools. So if the video one way of work doesn't work, we need another way. And calling them at that time was insanely expensive. It's still is kind of expensive if you want to call to another country, but things are already a little bit cheaper. But we have much more options. We can call over WhatsApp, over Zoom, we can call WebEx, we have Skype, we have Teams. There's multiple things that we can use. And if I want to know some more, I probably have to ask my teenagers, and they come up with another shit list of ways of on contacting people. But yeah, we're limited to that. And in this company, I'm working from home, but I have a computer from this company that only is able to do something if it's connected over VPN to that company. I cannot, so it's plugged in into my network, but it can't find my printer because it needs to go to VPN to that company, and then of course it can go back to my printer. So that limits a lot of these things, and then indeed we're stuck. But again, if people were already used to some of these things, they figured a lot of that out as well. Like I said, the other company, they had similar kind of restrictions, not that hard, but similar kind of restrictions. But because people found so much value over the workshop, they figured themselves out. And there's actually one of the breakout rooms was done over WhatsApp, I heard afterwards, although it was officially not a supported tool. So yeah, that's a lot of talking. So I think there were some questions. I'm not sure if that's
No, people are just chatting.
Is this something that could work for you if you would try it with product owners to work in such a way? Or have you tried already something already? Because it shouldn't be just my experience.
So I personally remember there was a PO guild when I was a product owner where we kind of did that, where we laid out some stories on the table. It was very hard for people to put up some stories there because it's kind of showing vulnerability. I'm not sure if I'm doing it right. But there wasn't a technique that we used or something. It was just, okay, I think this story could be better. Could you all help me? I think it makes sense. Keeping it to an hour, yes, it gives a nice block for those product owners to put into their agenda. I would have to see if I could convince the product owners I'm currently working with, because, as you say, a lot of pressure, not a lot of time, different time zones, so the overlap is already very small. And in that time box, they have to do a lot of things. So, first thoughts.
But if they show up, one of the other things, I don't think I mentioned it, but for me, this is typically something that's optional. This is something outside the guild, outside the thing. Say, okay, there is some questions in the guild or some similar place where they say we want to learn about stories. Okay, I'll organize a few workshops. It's optional, and you come. And what I've noticed is that the first one there might not be so many, and typically the next ones is a little more because they convince their friends or they really want to go. And then there might still be people dropping off, but there's usually a few that really like it and that keep coming. But you're right, it's all about, do we dare to show our vulnerability about what we already have?
So what were the what were the results that you saw when starting doing this versus previous?
For me, what I saw is that it because we actually work on real stuff, that they are much more engaged. They really like. And so when, for example, the first time they might not bring a story, like what Jeroen says, they're not sure about their own. The next time they do bring their stories because they see value in that. That's what I've seen in the companies. So they like much more to work on, they actually work on their own story. Even one of the last times I did it, it didn't work out perfectly well because, like I said, the remote stuff and it didn't. So the technical stuff was not that good, but all the feedback that I got personally was like, "Wow, this is a technique I want to start using." And already I heard that 2-3 product owners started working together to help them with their stories. And again, the techniques are not new. These I think most of them techniques exist at least for 5 to 10 years. And some of them have seen them in workshops and have used them, learned them in training, but are not using them in real life, or not enough, or have forgotten about it, or I don't know. So it feels that to me, that they need this kind of, I don't know, kick is too hard a word, but they need some kind of push to start using these techniques on their own user stories.
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to ask, why do you call it PO as a service? Can you just dig into that a little bit?
Good question. Yeah, I did it because, like I said, for me, it's also the PO that services the other people and want to help out as a service. That's how it came about as a name, because people feel sometimes that they're too much on their own, and this way they could use the workshop as a service for their own skills, but also afterwards it was more a joke, that because one of the companies where I first started using that, everything was as a service that I wanted to do, but that's how it related to me.
Thank you.
Is that answering your question?
Yeah, I mean, it's an intriguing question. I wasn't sure whether it was something that you're aiming to help POs transform to providing PO as a service as part of their service, or whether it was, yeah, I wasn't sure what the name meant.
Well, indeed, the fact that they could help out each other is for me also an important part, because like Ardita said in the beginning, I really want to create communities, and for me, especially in larger corporations, I noticed that there might be guilds, there might be community of practices, but in real life, a lot of these are just in Dutch we say praatbaak, and so they talk a lot and they don't do anything. So this was one way for me to make them work together and help each other, and dare to show their vulnerability, like Jeroen said. In that sense, it's a service to each other, but also to themselves.
That's really interesting that you're comparing it to an ineffective guild. So, okay.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that's it. Again, there are some beautiful guilds also in some of the other companies and that I've worked with. So it's not that they're all negative, but that's was one way, and that's also why I, in that particular first company where I started, where I put it outside the guild to just to not have it inside, because then it was a little bit separate. And I noticed afterwards, luckily, that also became more, not say the default, but a better way of working inside the guilds. They wanted to have more work on each other instead of just talking. That was a side effect that happened in that company.
Yeah, I can see that happening. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There was also another remark, or someone else had a question or a remark.
Yeah, I have a question about. You mentioned that you have succeeded with this technique online too, and have experiences good and bad online. I really think that this technique is really better using in person, and I want to know if the online experience that you had the difference between the bad and the good one was only the tools that you are using, or that there is something more.
Well, like I said, the first one where we did it, we had already the physical one in the room, and then we moved, because of COVID, we moved to online, and that worked rather okay. And so there is already a part, but the people felt how it could work, and they were very eager. So there was a lot of different mind shift, I think. That's I don't know how many, but I think 5 or 6 ones that we already had offline, and then we choose one to go off online, and so that there was already kind of spirit. It was already a kind of working group, so that was also a big difference, I think. So the mindset was a lot different, although when we started, um, yeah, I might exaggerating, and some people, well, they don't know which company I'm talking about. But these POs, let's say that when we started out with that one in this particular company, that they might not had one of the best workshop mindsets. So when we started off, it was really a hard work to make them work together and to do that. And I would say that their collaboration mode was actually less than in the company, and I'm trying currently to do it remotely. But because we did it offline first in the room, So I agree with you. I think Ricardo was the person who said
Yeah.
that if you do it offline first when people are together, that it's a lot easier. This works a lot. Also for me, as a facilitator, I can walk around, I can push a little bit, I just look at things if they're stuck. If they're stuck remotely, for example, when we did it the last time remotely with Skype, so basically they created all their own um, breakout rooms while calling each other. There was no way for me to call into one of the breakout rooms, so I had no idea if they were struggling, yes or no.
Yeah.
With the right tools, with the Zoom, for example, I can just drop in and I can ask if things are going. I can help a little bit, go out again, go to the next room. So I think tools there could make a huge difference. But again, the other group, yeah, because they kind of knew how things were working, that worked out. Um, but I definitely want to do more of that remotely, see if I can get it better. What I've noticed also is that I needed to write out much more how things were need to go um, up front. So I need to really say, okay, that minute, then you come back to the big group that minute, and that feels a lot less flexible. If you're in the room and I notice, oh, half of them or 80% of them they're struggling, I can give them an extra minute to before they can go to the next round, which is not possible remotely, because I cannot be in the room, I cannot visit all them at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that you cannot feel what is going on in that group. So this I think that maybe is the biggest
well,
problem.
Well, with the first group, for example, there were some people who were we were at some point we started working with teams. And so then they all started to chat a little bit in a separate room and to me, and they said, okay, so I'm working here with 5 screens, 2 computers and 5 screens. So I have a screen just opened for the chats with them at that moment that worked. But then again, it's a company where I can connect with any computer and I can see all the messages and all the tools that I'm working with. If you're limited to just a computer from that network and the tools from that network, you cannot do it that well. So again, tools can make
Yeah.
things better and helpful. Or people, if they just create, I can just create a WhatsApp group and have people chat with me how things are going. That might work as well. In the current company, it's not allowed because they're afraid, especially product owners, they will talk about the product. So our competitors might figure out what we're talking about. So it's illegal to use to talk about the product in a WhatsApp group. Okay.
I see.
Um,
Thank you.
I have a question, guys. If
yeah,
it's
go.
okay. Is this a good time? So
Yes, it's a good time.
so so many of the practices that you listed a few slides ago for product owners assume that the product owner knows exactly what they want to deliver, and I was just curious, how do you teach, intertwine with that the whole idea of experimentation and learning and learning, rapidly and those sort of ideas. So
Good
in other
question.
words, lean startup concepts as well.
Well, Lean Startup was one of the books that was in the books washing in most of the groups, because indeed sometimes that's what they need to learn. I haven't really thought about that, to be honest. So I haven't done any exercises around that. What I've in the larger companies, what a similar kind of problem is much more that the product owners might know their product. Uh, but depending on how much they work together with the other product owners, they might not understand the stories from the other product owner. Now, if it's one company working on a product like, say, Spotify, everybody knows the whole product. We might not know the details for that particular group, but we might know the whole product. But if it's a bank or it's I don't know, an insurance company or whatever, big one, where they all work on different kind of products and on way too much stuff, but that's another problem. They might completely not interact with each other. They sometimes need services from each other, but they don't understand each other's problem. Now, if they can get over that, what I've noticed is that they dare to ask the right questions that also challenge the product owners to rethink their own business and their own thing. Because they actually realize, oh, that other person doesn't know anything, but he's asking me the right question that makes me move on in another direction. So that has an advantage there. Um, but what I've noticed is it makes it also a lot harder to get started, because they really assume, yeah, I need to know that. So one of the things, and that's, thank you for that question, because what I forgot to say is that in one of the companies when we started working with that, um, people actually started to how would I say it, to pre-read the user stories, or to pre-give the user stories that they were going to work on, so that the others could read it and even ask questions before, because they felt not they didn't know enough about that. Is that answering your question?
Sort of, for me, one of the problems that I see out there is that uh, all too often product owners approach the software like you just described a moment ago, Yves. So, which is that I know my product, which assumes that they know what the customer wants. And yet we know that a very significant portion of software that's delivered is rarely used. And so I would challenge, do they really know what their customers want? And so how do we help our product owners approach this problem differently, and more with a hypothesis and the idea that I want to learn to validate my assumptions, and how do I do that? So that's just my thoughts
Are
around that.
those, but those can be probably some topics to bring on these sessions, right? So while initially maybe you want to start and get them comfortable with how to break a story, how to write a good story, probably down the road, when they bring stories that you sense that they have a lot of assumption and a lot of guesses, that's an opportunity to start bringing techniques from lean startup.
Yeah, well, with the user story mapping, typically we try to slice that first line of, okay, we put something there and then we want to validate that. Um, one of the interesting things I saw this year, for example, I worked for a bank company during COVID, and the Belgian government made the decision at some point to say, okay, every Belgian that has a loan in Belgium. Is they are no longer forced to pay back their loan immediately because of COVID. So all the banks had to adjust their software. But of course, the banks had big plans for the next 2 years, and all of a sudden there was a requirement from the Belgian government that by in whatever the next time they have to pay your mortgage back, that you're not forced to pay it back. So every bank had to change their software and release that in the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or something like that. So they had to redesign their thinking and the whole processes. And I'm actually busy right now talking with them with a lot of other coaches that, okay, before you had your big process, we know it was too big and you're trying for a few years to make it smaller, less waterfallish, and more an agile way. Now you had your other product that you had a new design that basically in 2-3 weeks you push something out. You probably skip from what I know, there's no technical and no security issues have been raised in none of the banks that I know of, but probably the process was maybe not optimal and was maybe not secure enough at some levels. So, and what we're now doing with Exco there is to see, okay, what would happen if we would take that process instead of taking this one and make it a little bit more agile? Is that, okay, can we take this process and see what do we need to make it more robust and more secure, but we'll probably end up more on this direction than if we try to move this more in the other direction. And that's the kind of conversations that we're having right now with Exco, and they're really wild about that because they like it. And so now it's the opposite challenge. Before, we had to challenge all these security people about, okay, how can we make it, and there were all this, and now these security people have to basically prove what they actually need to change that process. And that brings of course it also brings a lot of anxiety for product owners and everything that is unsecure and all these things, but it forces them to rethink all their work. Because and what I learned in the process, and that's very interesting, is that So banks, what I see typically, I don't know how it is in other countries, but in a lot of, in Belgium at least, banks as insurance companies, they have the most robust processes, and they want to have all the security, want to be the best in place and all these kind of things, and they're really hard processes. While when you talk to a CFO and the CEOs, they actually consider that they have one of the most, what's it called, volatile businesses, because anything can change, because indeed the interest rates and everything at banking level, this changes like almost constantly. And so they are living in a completely different world that they see as their own processes, and they've been struggling with that also for ages.
Mm-hmm.
Because from a value point of view, that's what they would like us to have. So I think that's partly due to COVID, but partially other work that was done before the last years, a year or two, that makes them that possibility in that company.
Does anyone have any other questions? I have one. So there is this concept of there's no product owner role.
Mm-hmm.
We're going more toward product ownership, and product ownership brings the whole team. Is the sense of from XP,
Yeah.
like we co-own the code, we also co-own the product. So how do you see that coming together if guilds and events like this reinforce the need for product owner role?
Well, for me, this is also probably why it's a good name, product owner, PO as a service, in the sense that, like I said in the beginning, it's not mandatory that people can come up. And what I've also noticed is that sometimes product owners bring team members. I didn't mention it,
Oh, that's great.
that there is indeed. It doesn't always happen, but it does bring. And I know one product owner who told me that he used the exact same exercise, so the slicing one that I talked about, did that with his team as well too, because he thought for some of the things, especially the data or the interfaces, I don't know enough, so that could be good to do that together with my team. So yeah, that is spreading at multiple roles as well, which is much more going into the product ownership that you're talking about.
That's a great idea of bringing someone from the team there. So it's not just product owners, but also the other people on the team that probably see it from a different point of view and bring another idea on the discussion.
Yeah, I personally believe a lot in beginners' mind, so that people who don't just not enough or just a little bit actually can bring in lots of ideas, and so that helps a lot.
Yeah.
And this is also why I like the 5-minute time box, because even if you're a product owner that is related to that, you don't have enough time to read the full user story, and so there is something in the head of in a part of your brain that says something, you blur it out, and you don't have much time to rethink it, so you keep it on and you move to the next part. And there is, I won't say that all these ideas are perfect, then there might be half of the ideas might not work, but the other half might be just the exact things that you need. And even the half that don't work might give you an inspiration to something else as well. And for me, it's also they're working on their actually user stories, and it helps them with their own user stories. But at the same time, I also hope that they learn, okay, how could I use it on my own stories, and how could I use it, both the techniques with my team, also for myself. But that a lot depends there on the mindset, because I've also seen maybe not so what Jeroen talked about, people who just feel insecure, they might then work for 3 hours just to find the perfect slicing, and then of course the team comes in and says, okay, no, you need to change this or that, so depending on how secure they are. I want to do that.
And this is Martin. Can we explore that concept of having no PO a little bit more?
Go ahead. Why do you want to say some more about it? What is your
I just
Oh,
it's a new concept to me, totally. Okay. So
I brought it up. I can say a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. That would be great. Thank you.
Any of you can jump in and bring your perspective as well as the others that have worked with product owners. We have a lot of good coaches here that haven't had a chance to speak probably. But Martin, the idea there is it's this product owner. And the title, the name gives a lot of focus on one person, one throat to choke, right? You own the product. And we know in reality that doesn't exist because that product owner has a manager, that has a manager, that has a CEO that makes the decisions. And there are a lot of things that go above the role of the product owner when it comes to owning the decisions that are made. At the same time, there are also decisions and ways of solving the needs or the future of the product that comes from the team, right? So team members also know they work when they work with the product, they also have ideas, they also understand the customer, they also know where the problems are because they are so close to the product. So to say that only one person owns a product, it is we going back to the one throat to choke concept, and we're putting only one person in the center. With the product ownership, we share that and we make it visible, understandable, agreeable, that there are things that the product owner brings. Probably the product owner says, well, these are the needs of the business for this quarter, right?
So can I just sort of interject? So it's not that we're taking the role away, we're just taking the concept of ownership away and making them more of a facilitator to all of the other people who are part of building and owning that product.
Yeah.
So Martin, in some places they have taken the role away as well. You know, where from outside of the team, people, you know, leadership, people will communicate what outcomes they hope to have, but that the whole team then becomes accountable to ideate and to iterate rapidly and to deliver on those outcomes, you know, so as opposed to one person making those decisions, that the team, and one of the fundamental ideas for this is that the team having ownership of it means that they have more skin on it, they're more engaged, they're, you know, as well. So sorry, Artie, I interrupted you.
No, and I think JF is also making a good point. JF, do you want to talk about what you wrote?
Yes, my first ever team that I was on didn't have a product owner or product manager, and it was all engineering led. And because what we were trying to do was solve a set of problems for us for the business, and we were all just looking at what was the biggest problem for our users and how can we solve that problem to help, you know, our company at that time. And no product owner, nothing whatsoever. And in recent years, because of this product owner role, I've been seeing teams less invested in what exactly is needed to achieve really positive outcomes, because I've seen people say, you know what, I just want something to just tell me what to do. And I'm seeing that loss right now on engineering teams. And so engineering teams in a sense have become not necessarily lazy, but complacent. And like, just tell me the priorities, tell me what I need to do. And there's very little interaction now in some of the teams that I've seen. So I think, to Mary Poppendieck's point, which she talked about this year, product owner as a role, as a single point of failure, or the ringable neck, as you said, Ardita, is a very negative behavior that's happening. And I actually think even user stories in and of itself are problematic nowadays, because user stories are all about what to build the outcomes and not necessarily about the problems that you need to solve. And so I'm starting to think about that maybe it's time we have a problem backlog as opposed to a product backlog.
Yeah, question backlog, a backlog of questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to double down on Mary Poppendix, she says we need agile champions.
Yes.
Right. She that's what she's been talking about. She's not about product owner, but she's about product champion. Because Martin, to your question earlier, there still needs to be someone that brings that business perspective into the team, right? But so the team does need the business perspective, the technical perspective, the market's perspective, the user's perspective. So all these need to be on the team in order for us to make good decisions and improve our product. But it's not only one person that says you shall do this. It is a ownership. And then
and so can we sort of close the loop on experimentation, on customer experiments with the customer, the questions, and sort of bring that into the conversation as well?
So I think what Yves said earlier about the beginner mind is really, really critical here, in that and the willingness to listen and to incorporate that mindset and those differing ideas that is really critical. If you have somebody who's the owner, that that might be a stumbling block. I also think so. I'll go along with what JF said. Stories, but almost for me, like long backlogs are a problem as well. Because long backlogs again assume that I know what I'm going to deliver, and I think that you end up with an inferior product if you approach it that way. Yeah, you have to deliver things in small increments, rapidly learn from those things. That's the experiments, right? And if what you learn is contrary to what your view is, or the idea, you have to pivot rapidly. Don't double down. And so this is kind of the modern view of product ownership. So there are two. So Martin, just to circle back, there are two ideas that are out there. There's the traditional, what Scrum talks about for product ownership, which is you create a backlog. You take your what you're delivering, you break it down, you add your acceptance criteria, you prioritize it. The team moves on, and in some cases that's the right approach. You guys mentioned something like the big insurance companies or the more traditional organizations, that might be the right approach. But what I'm finding more and more is that organizations that are focused on trying to deliver world-class product, and where that meets the user's very specific needs, they tend to do that less and less. At least the companies that I'm working with for lately, that if they have a backlog that's a month long, they start to question, why are they making so many assumptions? They're all about delivering rapidly, learning as quickly as possible, not from, learning from how the users use the system itself. So that's the experimentation piece of it. So again, two different contexts, two different backgrounds, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go on.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say that maybe you need both. Like I know that I need feedback from the customer base on what we've delivered and what they need from that and how to improve that. But there's also the elements of things that we may have a vision for that's not currently in place, right, within the software at all. And it's an experiment, but you've got to build a set of functions that is based on what customers want, but it's more of a traditional build, and then you put it out there and then you can experiment. I think maybe both. What do you think? Yeah,
the challenge is how can you do the least possible to answer that question, Martin? That's really the challenge.
Say that again.
I'm just saying that the challenge, Martin, that is that what is the simplest and the fastest way that you can do the least amount of work possible to answer that question?
Totally agreed. And the smaller the better. Sorry.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to add, because before we get there, a lot of companies are still in the state that it takes them ages before they can release something, and I think the kind of companies you're talking about are able to release like something on a daily basis or multiple times a day. And
Yes.
of course, if you're at, when was it? I think in 2011 or something like that, that Amazon could release every 7 seconds or something. Yeah, that's ages ago. That meant that in this hour that we're talking, they have released already like tons of times. If you're at that level, you can also release, and it's not that every work is 7 seconds. No, it's that with their full army of 10,000 developers, they're releasing very quickly. But all of these features might still be a day work or a week work. I don't know, but they're releasing very quickly, and they can very quickly get them some feedback on these things. And where the other companies think, oh, we have like 5,000 or 500 developers and we need to work and stabilize for 1 year before we can do it, and Amazon said we release it and we immediately see what's working and not working, and roll things back and things like that. But then you have to have your full release thing automated and be able to roll forward fixes and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different places where you need to be. And I would also like to add is that for product ownership, I think there is also the part that I don't know who said it in the beginning, but when you have a lot of stakeholders, both internally and externally, there is a part for me of the stakeholder that's of course the product owner, that's of course the facilitator of bringing all these things together. And you don't really decide, but you make sure that everybody's in the room or in the virtual room or whatever that has a stake in it, that can decide together what is now the most important thing, or what is the next thing we'll work on. And hopefully not for the next 10 years, but for the next week, and then next week we'll talk again and things like that. So then you can talk about these things and experiment there. And there's other companies where you just have a product owner that makes all the decisions in a sense, and that could be talking with customers. Hopefully it could be just because they have all their ideas in their head, but I hope at least that they check a lot with their customers. Of course, release things are very, very needed. But I do agree, the more you can bring, the more minds you can bring it in to think about that can help as well. I know actually a team where they were stuck in doing something late in the evening, or late like 7 hours in the evening. And at some point there was White House's walls on the streets, really wanted to have that song in there. Where someone from the cleaning personnel came in, and the team was stuck. They really couldn't solve it, and they said, okay, how would you use that? How would this piece of software, do you use our software? Yeah, I'm using your software. Okay, how would you want it to be solved? And that person came up with a crazy idea. It wasn't completely useful, but at least it inspired the team to solve the problem in a different way. And that's someone who had nothing, well, no experience in software at all, but an actual user. And so that sometimes that's all it takes. Huh?
Yeah. Moonway, do you want to lead us on the song though? That was something we wanted to do. That's
Are you asking to me or me?
I think it would be better to lead the Batman Jingle Bell. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, Jeroen again.
Are we done? So it's really easy. It's Jingle Bells, Batman smells, Robin laid an egg, the Batmobile lost its wheel, and the Joker got away. So now, Jingle bells, Batman smells, Robin laid an egg, Batmobile lost its wheel, and the Joker got away. Hey!
I'm glad this is recorded.
Well, Is anything anyone wants to say, or maybe Yves, do you want to wrap it up?
Well, I said, and this is why I showed the slides. The slides, I'll send them off to Adita, and the links are there. At this point, I created a very first idea of a PO as a service book to just have the things that I'm doing. I've made it mostly for myself, but it could be interesting to have it and to even add other things to that. But all the other links are just the original books that are where I got the ideas from, and some of the explanation, because I know I used some. Yeah, I talked about some techniques without explaining a lot, because the goal was not to explain these techniques, but just as an example of what could be used. But I do think if people are new and don't know some of these techniques, even if you're not new, some of these techniques might still be new to you, so that might be interesting to have them.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And as always, I would say, feel free to ask me any questions at any time. I do give what I call unlimited support, so people can just email me questions about everything I do. So this is one of the things I've done, so you can email me questions about that.
Thank you.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you so much for this session, Yves, and thank you for closing the year with us on our meetup with these conversations and poking ideas and bringing all these tools to people that are even new to our community, and good conversations with the ones that have experienced and have gone through some pains and gains and fun and all of that. So to all our community, I want to wish you happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and all of these holidays that we have going on. It's a holiday season. It's like 19 or 25, 19 holidays that are between now and January 7th. So a lot of reasons to eat well and drink well and cheer and be with family and friends and have joy and fun. So enjoy all of those, and we will see again in 2021 with some new meetups. I have already started talking with some people that we think will bring some interesting sessions. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for being with us during all these sessions, and thank you for keeping coming and bringing all your thoughts, all your ideas, all your goodness with us.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Happy holidays. Thank you.